Righty. Welcome to the Western Gulf Plain chapter of Wild Ones. And we started I believe, in 2022. I'd been a at-large member since 2004. So we started a chapter here in downtown Pitkin. I guess we're actually 6 miles west of Pitkin. But anyway, a couple of others have started chapters, one in Baton Rouge and one in Pontchartrain, north of New Orleans. So welcome to this chapter, and we'll try to meet every month and have some kind of presentation. We really have a really hard time doing it in person because we only have like 12 to 15 members, and they're scattered pretty much all over. But we'll try to do the Zooms and have people being able to watch. And let's see here. And the chapter right now, President is Christina Calcaterra, Vice President Christine Grubber, Secretary Kenny Desvain, and Treasurer is my daughter Dawn McMillan, and membership chair is Betty Kaufman. So those are our people that are in the leadership role here, are still kind of greatly involved, but because of rules that members of the same family can't hold higher offices. So we've twisted Christina's arm to become president and Christine to become vice president. And like I say, right now we're looking at having a Zoom meeting first Tuesday of the month. I think we're twisting Christina and Christine to put together a presentation for next month in May. And just a reminder, there are some upcoming events kind of partially supported by the Western Gulf Plain chapter, but mostly by Alan Akers, and the annual BBB that's been going on, I believe, for 35 years is going to be June 7th and 9th, and details on that. We're also trying to do a Martha Mania during National Moth Week from July 20th to the 28th. And that annual Lily Orchid that happens in August, and it's probably going to be 16th, 18th. We got to work on the details of that, and we'll see quite a few orchids. Hopefully the weather will be more cooperative this year than it was last year with the great heat and drought. So hopefully we're looking forward to that. But tonight I wanted to talk about selecting native plants to either rewild or wild your property. And because it could be that it wasn't never wild, or depending on where you are, and maybe it was taken away, and so the rewilding idea. So anyway, that's the main focus. And there was a list of the plants distributed through my morning email. So if you have one, look at it and write notes beside it, or just check it out as we go through it. But before I do, just wanted to talk about Louisiana and the forest types that we have here. Here's an old map put out by the Forestry Commission that showed basically the marsh along the coast, the Cajun Prairie, that white triangle in the southwestern portion, the red and yellow being forest, and a little bit of upland hardwood forest in that corner of Louisiana, at the beginning of the toe in the so-called Tunica Hill area. And then other people have made maps like this. Is one I used in my dissertation on grasses, and similar with the upland in the black, that Tunica Hill area, the pine forest of most of Louisiana, a little bit of prairie in southwestern, and then of course the marsh, but I forgot about the bottomland hardwoods that are the big area of the Mississippi River and the Red Rivers. And those are the five that I think of. There are, a larger area of thinking about them. They're the pine forest, the bottomland hardwood, the marsh, the prairie, and then the upland hardwood. There are the areas that I mentioned, and the pine seems to be the largest area in the state. And there are Louisiana hardness zones starting obviously from the coast, going up and with the numbers and so forth. So in other words, the top part of the state is pretty warm. The middle part of the state a little bit colder. I'm assuming the top part is very cold, the middle a little bit warmer, and then along the coast warmer, and then way down below New Orleans, where the Louisiana oranges are really very warm. So that's kind of a hardness zone. They've been changed recently. I don't look at the hardness zones too much. I like more about the soils, the kinds of soils in the state, how they're distributed and so forth. So I find it much more important than ordinance zones, because based on last few summers and winters, we've had almost the same kind of zones, often from the south end to the north end. So when I think soil is a lot more important, and two things in soil. One is the texture. That's the percentage of sand, silt, and clay. Makes a big difference in what plants can grow and how well they grow. And another thing that's often overlooked is the pH. There's the pH can either be acid or it can be neutral or go into alkaline. Many of our soils, not most, but many are acid. So I think more of those two factors, the texture of the soil and the pH, when you're considering planting plants. And the texture distribution in Louisiana, the bottomland hardwoods have a lot of clay in it. Most of the others have a good bit of sand and silt. So you think, when I say the others, the pine, the prairie, the upland hardwoods, those have a good bit of sand and silt. Some more than others, but that's important in the texture distribution. And as far as the pH distribution is concerned, the pine forests have generally a pretty acid pH. The others, anywhere from slightly acid to neutral to alkaline. And so you think of the hardwoods, the prairie, the marsh, both the bottomland and the upland are having pretty kind of neutral to alkaline soils, but again, sometimes leaning toward more acid. So think of those. And just to think about the pH distribution, look at this plant called featherbush, see, and the distribution in yellow. See how it skips the Red River mainly and the Mississippi River, where you do have the alkaline. It's one of those plants that I think of that really likes the acid pH, and you can see where it's in western Louisiana, eastern Louisiana, in the pine forest regions where there are acid pH soils. And within those 5 zones that I mentioned, there's also small areas of the others. So don't think of those 5 as being 100% pine or 100% prairie or 100% or anything, because you can, for example, find marsh throughout the state, even in the pine regions and others along the edges of lakes and streams, and all 4, pine, prairie, upland, and bottomland. Of course, it's in marsh itself. And you can find limited prairies in the forest, in the bottomland, and in the marsh. So please don't go out thinking that, it's 100% pine, 100% marsh, 100% anything. And you can also find pine, upland, or bottomland can be in the prairie, and those are called gallery forests. And they can also be in marshes, particularly today that now we have the natural levees and the man-made levees along the streams. And the pine, upland, or bottomland can be found as small strips or patches within each other. So don't think all of it. But the main focus tonight is to talk specifically about plants. And this is where, if you have that list available, we're going to start kind of following that through as we go through the list. My talk will follow the list that I distributed, and it's out there, I think, a couple of times into the morning email. So think of trees that would be growing good here. And Doug Tallamy always says one of the first plants to consider is an oak. And my favorite is the white oak. Now, there are lots of choices of oaks, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But the white oak has been kind of a symbol of lots of strength and so forth in humans. Some people would plant a white oak for when a child was born, to watch it grow strong along with the child, things like that. And there are lots of insects, moths, butterflies, particular moths, whose caterpillars eat the oak. So it's one of the highest listing of moth caterpillars that you would find, or would be an oak. So don't think you have to have a white oak. Many of these others, it's not a complete list, but live oak, southern red, nuttall, shumard, overcup, water oak, just about any of those, blackjack, sandjack, willow oaks. Some of these are wetter than others, so you should know which ones you might be able to do better with. Some are drier than others. And some like the bur oak is pretty much a North Louisiana one, post oak, and so forth. So I know oaks take up a lot of room. So hopefully you have enough land or area where you're working with to have an oak. If not, try to convince your neighbor if they have more land, or get involved in the nearby parks or some natural system to get oaks in, because I realize oaks may take up a lot of your, or will take up a lot of your space, and you may not have that much space to spare. So, try to get an oak near you some way or the other, because those are very, very important in the life histories of, and the moth caterpillars are, as Doug Tallamy will talk about, will feed a lot of birds. And so there's so many caterpillars that are need to raise one flock of birds. So be aware of that. Some others, and these are not in any kind of order, just put them together. An important tree out there is what the Sweet Bay Magnolia, or the Virginia Sweet Bay. My ancestors called it the White Bay, and it's got white on the undersurface of the magnolia. It's an important spice plant, also an important, again, caterpillar host plant, and it has the pretty flowers. The one thing that I've noticed about this plant is that even though it's naturally found in acid pH bogs and savannas, I've seen this all over the state. And so it seems to be adaptable. That's something you need to think about. Will it grow on my property if I have one of those less acid ones or whatever? And this is one I've seen all over. In fact, I was giving a talk in New Orleans at the Southern Heritage Museum and looked out the window, and there's a live oak. There's a White Bay, Virginia Sweet Bay. I couldn't believe it, because you just think of that as being naturally found in bagalls, bogs, and acid pH situation. But there it was in New Orleans, which is very alkaline and a long way from the pH, from its natural habitat. So that's one that's very adaptable. Some of the others I'm not as familiar with, but that's one I know that I've seen. Another one is Red Bay. That one is also. Now, this is one that's an important caterpillar host plant, also an important spice plant. And I think that for the people making filet in the past, they may have used this plant because sassafras is usually not found south of Lafayette, because it doesn't like to have its feet wet. So there's a wetter habitat. And I've seen Red Bay all the way through the marsh, all the way to Grand Isle. So this one is also very adaptable. So Red Bay and what I call White Bay are two plants that you should consider. And particular Red Bay is not as big as White Bay, and it's not as big as the oak. So you should be able to have room for a Red Bay on your property. So that's important to think about, is the size too. Maples, so lots of maples out there. But there are two major groups of maples. The red maple, which is really all over Louisiana, very common. Often people talk about the Interstate 10 going into New Orleans having red maple in flower in January and February. And then when you get into the better drained soils, a hardwood forest, you can find sugar maples, in particular Florida sugar maple. And believe it or not, even in North Louisiana, you can find the famous sugar maple of New England. It doesn't make much sap for sugar like it does in New England, but the plant's there, so you can see it. In fact, I have a Florida sugar maple growing on Allen Acres, but it's in the nearby forest too. So a maple is an important one. They're, again, a nice tree, nice color, and then also having quite a number of caterpillars. That's a consideration to think about. What are you feeding with your native plants? And quite a few caterpillars on maples. Red mulberry feeds humans too, but it's a neat plant. But I think the biggest thing, it feeds birds. Now, one thing to be careful of, there's a native and a non-native. And I don't know how many times I've told people that the red mulberry is native and the white mulberry is not. It was brought in I don't know, several decades ago to, for making silkworm growth. But they say, I don't have white mulberry, I have red, but I think the fruits on white mulberry are mostly dark red, just like red mulberry. So you can't tell it by looking at the fruits. You have to look at the leaves. The top of the leaf of a white mulberry is very shiny and glossy, and the top of a red mulberry is rough. It's kind of like a miniature, a mild sandpaper, I would call it. And so kind of jokingly, I say sometimes that you would consider white mulberry for toilet paper, but maybe not red mulberry for toilet paper. But they're out there and they're often mistaken. And I think there's some hybridization going on, but white mulberry is one you don't want. You want to make sure because it is kind of aggressive, and it's also, if you're considering, it's not a native. So that's one to think about. But mulberries in general are not really big trees, so you should have enough room in your property for one. Devilwood's a very interesting one. It gets its name from the fact that the wood is very hard to work. So it's like working with the devil or whatever. So devilwood has an important characteristic, and I forgot to mention that on the others. The red bay and the white bay are evergreen. The maple is not. So that's a consideration to look at for the winter. Devilwood is evergreen. Now, its natural range is east of the Mississippi River in Louisiana. So, and from there back probably toward Florida. But it's been planted. I have two property.
I can't right now. I'm going to school.
I have two on my property planted, so they're adaptable throughout the state. So you can get a devilwood, you can plant it, and like I say, it's evergreen. So that's an important consideration. Sometimes
I'm going to school, I'll tell you.
Not always. So think of devilwood as a good evergreen consideration. Now, I often get asked, how do you recognize an evergreen in the summer?
I'll watch a movie with you after a while when my class is over.
When you look at it, it's tough and leathery, plant, but obviously it's very easy in the winter. But in the summer, for plants that are evergreen, you just kind of have to look and see how tough and leathery they are. Those are usually the evergreen ones. So devilwood's a great tree, I think, to get out there. And again, it's not a giant one, so you probably have space on your property to grow one. Persimmon is very, very useful. The bark to me is pretty. The leaves can be dried and made into a tea that I've read has more vitamin C than oranges. And then of course the fruits are edible when they make, and to me they're much more tasty than the Japanese persimmon. They have a strong, great flavor. A couple of drawbacks. One is that they have lots of seeds, so you don't get that much out of it at all. And the second is these plants are dioecious. So in other words, they're mama trees and daddy trees. So if you only have the daddy tree, you're not going to get the fruits. And one last thing I forgot almost is that after you eat the fruits, you can take those seeds and dry them and roast them and make a coffee substitute. Now, it doesn't have caffeine, so you're going to have to stay with community coffee or some other coffee to get caffeine, but it actually has a dark flavor like, to me, community. So I usually have it on display, at least the ground up roasted seeds for that. So a very useful plant. Persimmon is the native persimmon is a great addition to your garden. Black cherry, flowering recently, making fruits. I think the bark is a wonderful color, that gray, and then it gets darker. And others, it's also a little bit larger tree than a couple of those I've been talking about, but a great one. And then, of course, the fruits are edible, but they're very small. But birds really go after them. So I have trouble getting them. And for people in South Louisiana, it's a tradition to take, I don't know how much is still done today, to take the black cherries, put it in alcohol, vodka or gin or something, and leave it for about 6 months, and you would have something called cherry bounce. I was giving a talk recently in North Louisiana, and nobody had ever heard of cherry bounce. It shows you the difference between the two parts of the state when it comes to black cherry, and other things too. But anyway, black cherry is a great addition to me to thinking, and I'm just lucky I have a lot on my property and a lot of babies, and we've given away many black cherries. Anybody that comes by, if we can find one, they can sure dig it up, because it's one of the most common, somewhat larger trees that we have on Allen Acres. Of course, the very famous sassafras, that the leaves that are harvested, dried, and made into traditional filet. I've heard and realized that the best time is in July and August. At that point, the leaves would be stocked or stored. There would be a lot of the necessary ingredients to make filet, the flavor and so forth in it. Right now, they're just starting to grow, so they're pretty plain. They don't have a lot of the stored compounds that would be needed to make filet. So sassafras very instant. Now, the roots can be dug up, and I do this every edible plant class. I go out and find roots and boil it and make a tea. Now, I should point out that the roots have a chemical that's been found to be carcinogenic, but lots of people have been drinking it for years. I've been drinking it for years. I don't know how much they fed to the poor rat back there to make the test, but anyway, and other people say maybe the test may not have been done correctly. I don't know, but anyway, I stay away from. I still drink it and not worry about it at all. So on the roots, the so, but go back for a second and say no compound at all in the leaves, just in the roots. No problem with the leaves at all. So keep doing your filet, and I keep doing the roots, but be aware that has been reported to be carcinogenic. Sourwood, I've been still trying to get one. I had one on my property, and when I built a new house, I forgot to move it, and it got destroyed and the bulldozing to make space for the house. But sourwoods are a wonderful plant in central Louisiana and a lot of it east of the Mississippi River. So there is a sourwood honey, right, where the bees have taken the pollen and the nectar from the flowers, and people collect that, make sourwood honey. To me, the most interesting thing are the leaves, how the leaves turn what my major professor from years ago turned a red color. He called it like a beef steak color, an uncooked beef steak color. So very interesting on the sourwood. Not a really tall tree, but one of the things, if you are one of those perfectionists, be aware this tree is almost always a leaning tree. It doesn't go straight up. So if you're one of those that have to have trees dressed like the military, you may want to stay away from some, because every one of them kind of leaning to one side or the other. But it's a great tree, great traditional Southern tree. But it's only in about central Louisiana back to the east. It's not found in western Louisiana. It's not found in East Texas yet. Yellow poplar, it gets to be the tallest non-pine tree in eastern North America. So it's a great tree, wonderful leaves, wonderful flowers on it. So a lot of uses, but it's a fast-growing tree. So, but this was one, though, you better have room, because it is going to be taller and bigger. And it's a great tree for that. So just be aware of the size on it. And there's a flower. So it's in the magnolia family. So it kind of has that magnolia flower look. So very popular tree in some places with the size. A very interesting tree. Now this is one, if you are concerned about trees that are armed, that have spines or prickles or thorns, you have to be aware of that. Sometimes I once remember on Fort Polk working with the school and was advising them to plant not this tree, but another one that I think we have it in the group here, called the Devil's Walking Stick. But they didn't want to plant it because of the kids getting hurt and I was thinking there should be some selective pressure. They should learn not to walk into it. And looking around, there were a lot of spiky, as my grandchildren say, holly's already there. So one more tree wouldn't have hurt. This is a great tree too, because look down at the bottom, it's a host for the giant swallowtail. It's in the citrus family. So we have quite a number on our property. And I think my neighbor has some paper company land right behind his house, and we have probably harvested 100 toothache trees and given away for people for growing at their house. I'm just lucky I can go there and get them. In fact, I have 4 or 5 in pots right now. So that's a wonderful tree. And then it also, when you chew on the leaves, it deadens your mouth. So it's also called tingle tongue and several other things. But it is armed. So, if you're concerned about that. And on the left, you can see the the bark of the tree has bumps and then arms on it. So it's a very interesting tree. And so you might be the only one in your neighborhood with a toothache tree. So if you're trying to stay ahead of the Joneses or whatever with vegetation, this might be one to also consider. So very lucky. There's a story back when I lived in Monroe. We traded a jar of soy sauce with Bill Fontenot to get a toothache tree. And then a few years later, we moved to where we are now. And when we got here, we discovered we had a bunch. We've been trying to get that soy sauce back and give him back to now. But we were happy to get so many toothache trees, but we joked about that we wanted our soy sauce back and we'll give you the tree back because now we have plenty of them. American holly, evergreen, red fruits, smooth bark. One of the few hollies that wood for making furniture, building houses, because it gets to be a big one, very pure white. I know when I was in the forestry school at LSU, they had one room that was lined with American hollywood, and that was a beautiful wood. So if you can get some American hollywood, that's great. Also, the tree is a little bit well, is a good larger than most hollies, so it's going to be large, but it's also evergreen and it's spiky. The leaves have spines along it. My grandchildren get the credit for that word spiky. So anything very interesting. Most of them have red fruits. I have one selection in my yard that has yellow fruits that came from Stephen F. Austin in Nacogdoches, where I guess they found one with yellow fruits and they propagated it, and I got one of those. So I have a yellow fruited one, but then throughout the rest of my property, I have a lot of red fruited American hollies. So if you're looking for odd things, you can take those, propagate them. And one last thing, this makes a wonderful tea. Roast this, and it's some people's favorite. The leaves, you can roast the leaves, and people some of them have liked that American holly tea. And I've been told that almost every holly in China is used to make tea. And then, so that's a few of the trees, and here are a few of the shrubs. Of course, the difference is kind of technical. It's usually it's multiple stems and not as tall as trees, but different people have different opinions. And then you could even go further into tall shrubs, short shrubs, and so forth. But anyway, a few of the shrubs to think about. Red alder, often forgotten about. Alder cerulata. It's got what looks like little miniature pine cones for the female flowers. And then the male flowers are in things like you see on oak trees, the catkins. And this thing flowers in January and February, but not real attractive. But I think just to have an alder. I've been told that here in Louisiana, we're lucky because we only have one species. When you get further north, they have to worry about which species. They have 2, 3, maybe even 4 or 5 different species of alder. We have the one, but I'd say it's a tall shrub, maybe a small tree. But if you can find one, I like the shape of the leaves on that and the interesting flowers on the red alder. Stinkbush, star anise. Growing up in St. Helena Parish on the Tickfaw River, we called it stinkbush. The crushed leaves do have a strong odor, but I was told by horticulturists I need to get rid of that name. It's hard to sell something called stinkbush. So most people today call it star anise. It's got beautiful red flowers. It is evergreen again, and it's a small shrub. And I think if you can get one, it's a great addition. Unfortunately, I had one growing, but that drought and hot temperatures last year seem to have done it in. But I'm still waiting to see if it'll finally come out this year. If not, I can always go back to my old home place and get some star anise. I try not to use that word stinkbush anymore, but you still find a few people from Southeast Louisiana that refers to it. The crushed leaves do have a pretty strong odor. Wild azalea, if you missed the last couple of weeks, there's still a few hanging on. This is the pink one usually, and it flowers around Easter every year, and it's pink. I remember growing up, we called it honeysuckle, and other people tell me they called it honeysuckle. And of course, then later I was told, it's a wild azalea, and this species is canescens, and it's usually found on the not in the, you kind of think of it as being wet, but it's usually on the natural levees of streams. So it's a little bit drier there, but you may have to go through some wetness to get to it, but it's usually on the drier. There are a couple of white species that come along later that are that are in wetter spots like this one. This is Rhododendron oblongifolium. Look at the glands on that's very glandular on the outside of the white petals. This flowers usually in May and has leaves. So that first one, this one flowers without leaves, and then this one flowers with leaves, and it's a small shrub and very, very sticky. And this is usually found in wetter areas near the pitch pine box, oblongifolium. I think it's been lumped with other species today, but anyway, I still think of oblongifolium as a small shrub-like white azalea and very sticky on the outside of the petals. A lot of people know this one, American beautyberry, purple. There's also pink fruited ones and even some white albino fruited ones out there. I don't like when the common name is taken directly from the scientific name. But that's what happens with this one. And that's the reason, as I've grown up, or as I learned it, I preferred to use a name that people in the country applied to it, and that was French mulberry, whereas American beautyberry is a direct translation of Calocarpa americana, American beautyberry. So, and I really prefer a real common name rather than a botanically created common name from the scientific name. But I'm just picky like that, and you know, and I guess I can at my age. I could go with whatever I want on that. But also, I was told this was poisonous, the berries, and now I've eaten lots and I taste them. But we were told, and we did, take the leaves and rub them on our body to keep mosquitoes away, and it seemed to work. So that was very interesting. There's a strong and different odor in the leaves, especially when they're young and tender. So and this is a very common, widespread, smaller shrub. So it's a great one to add. And if you need one, I've got plenty on the property, and I think I have one in a pot somewhere. Red buckeye. I have the biggest tree that's ever been seen, given to me by Peter Luce. I think I'm not sure. I think he might be on the watching tonight. I didn't check all the people, but anyway, from Chirino, Texas, I got this one, and this thing was 25 feet tall. Hurricane Laura took about a third of it out, but it's still beautiful. When it starts to flower, I go and get out my hummingbird feeders because I know those hummingbirds are going to be here within a day or two. And sure enough, just like on time, I started smelling their tequila on their breath, and there they were. So I have this one in, and I'm starting to put out the feeders, but I don't have to right now because I have this wonderful tree, even though it's still about 1/3 to 2/3 the size it used to be, still has a lot of red flowers on it. So that's a wonderful tree, but it's usually a shrub. And also, unlike many other plants, it starts to lose its leaves. They change color and start falling off in August. You don't really get a really good fall color out of the leaves of the red buckeye. So but that's one you need to have. And most of the time, no matter how small your space is, you're going to have room for this one. Yeah. But you may want to realize that if you're in one of those zones that's got a lot of clay, you might want to add some sand to the soil. It likes a better drained soil. So you might want to, fix up your soil a little bit, maybe raise it a little bit if you're in one of those lower hardwood, bottomland hardwood type. A plant that a lot of people have not heard of, a Carolina buckthorn. It's in the Rhamnaceae. I always recognize the Rhamnaceae by looking at the lateral veins. And this picture, I should have turned one of the leaves over, but you can see how, just from the back, how the lateral veins are so equally spaced. And that's, to me, is a characteristic of the family called the Rhamnaceae. Some of you may know some other members. When we go to the Rio Grande Valley, there are several members of the Rhamnaceae down there. But here it's there's a vine out there. It's called in the Rhamnaceae called Berkemia scandens rattan vine. I'm sorry, in you know, in that family with it. So it also has those leaves. So, but that one's kind of a boring looking. I don't know if I have it. I don't remember if I have it in the vines or not, because it doesn't really have pretty flowers, and so most people get rid of the rattan vine. Buttonbush, you know, you used to think of butterflies not going to white flowers, but they go to this one. I need a better picture. I see it's out of focus, but this is one of the magnets for butterflies, and it's normally found in wet areas, but like some other wet area plants, they tolerate the wet conditions, and you can move them to dry conditions. So like bald cypress, you don't have to have it in water where it's normally found, or in a wet area. You can put it in dry areas. So I have some on dry areas here, buttonbush, and it's a wonderful magnet for butterfly nectaring. Chinkapin, very interesting plant. That's like a miniature chestnut. I was working with the Caddo and reading a book about the Caddo, and they were describing a plant that had the nut that had the flavor of a chestnut, but it was about the size of a small acorn. And I knew right away they were talking about chinkapin. Now, please remember there is a chinkapin oak, which is not this. This is a plain chinkapin. Now, admittedly, the leaves of this are very, very difficult to separate from that oak, that introduced oak, the sawtooth oak that's introduced and planted for a lot of wildlife food. But the leaves are pretty much very much the same looking at them. So you have to focus on it to be sure. This is in the genus with chestnut, and the same light that wiped out the chestnut affects the chinkapin now. But what it does, it doesn't kill it, but instead of being a tree, it's now a shrub. So I have several of these on my property, and I have several that supposedly are resistant to the blight that are planted. So we're going to see. It's getting ready to flower, and I hope this is a year I finally get to eat another chinkapin, the fruit. So I'm waiting on it, but a very interesting plant out there with an interesting history. Now, some of you that are fishermen or fisher persons realize there is a fish called chinkapin, and as I said earlier, there's also an oak called the chinkapin oak. The mamu, the coral bean, is probably the wrong category. But if you go to the Rio Grande Valley, this same plant is a tree down there, a small tree. So it's a wonderful plant, and starts to flower in May. So it fills in some food for the hummingbirds after the red buckeye. So think of the mamu is there. It's also one of those that's armed, or spiky, so be careful of that. It dries, but a very interesting plant out there. And if you can get one on your property. And again, I had brought some to Monroe, had none, got to this property, and I have at least 6, 7, maybe 8 plants scattered around the property, maybe more. I just haven't seen them because being red-green colorblind, I don't see this when it's in flower. I see the leaves more than the flowers. But an interesting plant. You might consider making sure you add it to your property. Elderberry has lots of interest in lots of things, and we have lots of these and we've given away. In fact, this past weekend and the weekend before, when I did edible plant classes, several people took an elderberry home. It's almost like a weed in parts of my property. Of course, it has the famous fruits that people make jelly and wine and other things out of, that are supposed to improve the immune system. I like the flowers. The flowers have a wonderful odor, and when it is in flower, we take the flowers the night before, put them in water, put them in the refrigerator, and we can serve elder water, very refreshing. Also, we have been known to take those flowers off and make a loaf of bread, and you have a nice scented, flavored loaf of bread from the flowers of elderberry. So very, very. And one last thing that I actually have done in my life, and when this plant gets older, the stem can be hollowed out and you can make the barrel of a pop gun. And I actually did make a pop gun as a kid. My father showed me, he did one, and we used 3 plants to make a pop gun. We made the barrel out of the elderberry, a bigger one, it was hollow. And then Also, we hollowed it out, then we whittled a plunger from an oak branch, and then we used the fruits off of a non-native China berry and put in for the, and you'd push on one end and out the other end, it would pop, make a little noise and pop, and you could shoot your brother or sister from a few feet away with that. So very, very interesting plant. Now, one other thing that I did when I was taking a class in college on fungi, we took the pith out of elderberry and made our own little holding system for slicing it up with a razor blade. You know, you have to make thin slices that they make for microscope slides. Well, we did it just using the pith of the elderberry, and you would slice it and then put the little piece of mushroom or whatever plant you want in between, then take a razor blade and it would hold it and allow you to slice it. So very interesting that we got from the late Dr. Bernard Lowy in microbiology, in fungi. Right. Fetterbush, very interesting. It's in flower right now. I've been seeing it back on the banks of the Whiskecheetah here, Lionia lucida. It's one of those that requires acid. I don't know if anyone's been successful in moving it to non-acid areas, but pretty pink flowers early. Evergreen. That's a little history here. I used to take people back on my property and say, this is the furthest west in the United States that this plant grows. But I had some visitors from Texas and I showed them how to identify it. They went back to Newton County, right across the Sabine River, found it and reported it new to Texas. So it's no longer the furthest west. There are a few plants further west in just across the Sabine River. So probably some other plants like that in the distribution and so forth as people explore and find more plants for the distribution patterns. Fringe tree, if you're riding around anywhere right now, there are fringe trees everywhere. Everywhere I go up and down, even in the country, you can see them natural. You get into some of the cities, people have planted them, are very popular. It also has a lot of common names, granddaddy, graybeard, and the list goes on. Easy to recognize when it's young or just about any time. It has opposite leaves that are, you can see there in the background behind the fruit, kind of lanceolate. But the biggest thing, the petioles are purple. The stalks are very, so I see them, the baby ones, and you can recognize them at that point with the purple petioles. This plant, or these plants, are also mama and daddy or dioecious, so they're male and female. And they make that fruit there that I've read can be made into an olive, and the cattle did. But boy, you take it right off the tree, it's extremely bitter. Now, if I say something is bitter, you better believe it is bitter because I eat a lot of wild plants. But so you would have to process this with salt, just like olives, I understand. But a very interesting plant, a great one for your yard. I remember even in Monroe, which is bottomland hardwood, people have planted rancid graybeards, and I see it in other places, or the fringe tree. So a great one to add to you for a short time. Now the flowers, and then if you get the female tree, you'll get the fruits. Hawthorns, there are a lot of those out there. This is the parsley hawthorn. There, the other ones, the mayhaw is one of those in that genus of hawthorns that people plant. So some dry, some wet, and quite a bit of variety. Often difficult to identify the species, but like the parsley hawthorn is easy, but there are a number of others. So hawthorn has in white flowers right now. But Dawn and Jeff from Almost Eden, right down the road from me, found one with pink flowers. They're so excited, they're trying to figure out how to root it. This was a parsley hawthorn that had pink flowers, not white. I can say I've never seen that, but they brought it back from just a few miles from where I am. But that's a small, and again, most of these are small trees, large shrubs, so a great addition. Of course, most of these are spiky though, so keep that in mind if you're worried about, the getting stuck by a plant. So the most are armed or spiky. And some more, there's a fruit on it. The fruits are edible, even on these, but they taste like real dry apples. So, the mayhaw, they make jelly out of, but you can eat these, but you're going to find that they're pretty dry. There's also a couple of blue fruited ones, so very interesting in the hawthorn groups. Yaupon, noted for being the only native plant to the United States with caffeine. And people, it's called the black drink. It's also an evergreen shrub. People often ask me, how do you separate this from the Chinese ligustrum or the what's the other common name? But anyway, that one, the privet, the Chinese privet. But look at the leaves over there on the right. See how they're alternate, whereas the privet is opposite. So that's one way. And the fruits on the privet are black. And so that's very interesting. And if you know, lots and lots of yaupon and people living in the pine regions of the state, it's often considered to be so invasive because there's so much of it that's a problem. But have lots of that, and that's one that I serve tea out of, or tea to every edible plant class. We roast the leaves and add hot water, and it's called black drink. Scientific name, Ilex vomitoria. And so that's kind of a terrible name. And I've heard two reasons for that scientific name of vomitoria. One, supposedly when Europeans got here, they saw the Native Americans drinking tea from this and then throwing up. Some people say that those people had fasted for several days, and as much volume as they drank, water would have made them throw up. So I don't know. The other reason is we tied to money. But I've heard some explanations that when this got back to Europe, they were so concerned that this plant would replace the regular tea that people were drinking for years in England and many other European, and even in the United States, they were worried it would replace that tea. So they were very concerned. So they're able to get that ugly name on it. So people would stay away from it, and the tea trade and business would continue. So I don't know. When it comes to things like that that involve money, maybe that's more likely to be the truth than the other one. I don't know. But anyway, it's out there. But it's not, I've never thrown up. I drink a lot, and there are people now selling the tea. So out there for you to make. So I think one of those may be the real, or maybe there's even another explanation for that. Summer huckleberry. A lot of people know this as Elliott's blueberry. Growing up, we would pick this and eat it, and we called it the summer huckleberry. Other people call it Elliott's blueberry, and probably another 10 names or so. Smaller, maybe a larger shrub, but not very big. But the fruits are wonderful, almost like a blueberry in flavor. So be aware of that one. And the fruits get ripe in May. So it's still a month from summer, but it was May and June that you would eat those. Then the other one, we called it winter huckleberry, and this is also called sparkleberry, tree huckleberry. It's a small tree, and the fruits ripen in August and September, but they'll stay on through the winter. I've seen them taking them to an edible plant talk in Houston one time in February. They were still on the tree. Now, these fruits are not nearly as good as the one before this, the summer one, but I'm sure that people coming up on these in November, December, January, had not had anything sweet to eat, would probably be very excited to find this and try it, even though it's not nearly the quality as the summer one, and also something that's probably very important. They probably had never tasted of a Snickers bar. So that probably was great for them to have the winter huckleberry. Oak leaf hydrangea is a very popular ornamental small shrub. So that's very white. We have quite a bit in eastern Louisiana. I think this is another one of the few plants that were smart enough to stay out of Texas. No, I shouldn't say that. But they haven't been found on the west side of the Sabine River, as far as I don't think. But lots of ornamental ones. And in fact, I remember Stephen F. Austin, they had a selection called Angola. They had gotten it near our prison here in Louisiana, and we're working with it over there. So oak leaf hydrangea is a great one. Smaller shrub, but typical hydrangea looking plant. So a great addition. New Jersey tea is a very small shrub. It's hard to even think of it. It's so short that it is woody, very short, pretty white flowers. And this is a plant that the tea made from the leaves of this tastes the most like traditional tea out of China. And supposedly during the Revolutionary War, when tea was not available, this was a very sought after plant to make tea to replace that one. But as far as I can tell, no caffeine in these. So for the New Jersey tea, but a wonderful plant, very small, wouldn't take up much space at all for that. But it's usually not in the hardwood forest, but up in those drier, sandy soils of the pine forest. Palmetto is the opposite. You go back the other way, you get a little bit wetter, you get down to the bottomland hardwoods. Very interesting plant. I think Bill Fontenot once called it as being like a statue. It doesn't get much bigger. It's say pretty much the size, and you have it in your yard, but it's green, it's evergreen. So it's a good plant to kind of fill in the space, and it's not going to get much bigger than what it is when you get it. So it is a statue in a sense. So, and then a very interesting plant called the pawpaw, the largest Native American fruit. And I got so lucky, I don't remember how many years ago, maybe 15 years ago, I bought a couple of these from Birmingham, Alabama, and Jan and Dean that had a nursery there. Can't remember their last name, but anyway, they sold me these, and I've given away sprouts, and every July, except 23, we didn't have any. Of course, then there was a lot of problems in 23, but we're looking forward to 24. It's in flower right now, and hopefully we'll have pawpaw fruits in July to eat. So again, people have told me the sprouts from mine flower and make fruits in 3 to 4 years. So that's, and I'm not sure, but it seems like that's all one tree. I hear rumors that you need 2, but mine seem to come from the one tree. I don't know. I've not done any scientific studies on that, but I know I just enjoy the flowers, enjoy the fruits, and then enjoy the smell of the crushed leaves is kind of strong. But also, of course, that's where the zebra swallowtail eats only this one, although there is a dwarf that also has leaves that they could eat. So interesting plant. The dwarf is much smaller, but even this one is never more than maybe 20, 25 feet tall. Most of the time it's a shrub rather than a tree. Silver bell, very interesting plant, and it's in flower right now, but the edible plant class that's coming up on the 20th and maybe of April, and for sure the one in May, will eat those fruits that you see in the bottom right. You nibble along the edge and you get a very tart flavor from that, much like the carambola or 5-star fruit of the Orient. So silver bell. So pretty white flowers right now. I don't remember, but I'm pretty sure there are some caterpillar not butterflies, but maybe some moths that eat the leaves of silver bell. But that's a smaller tree if you have room for that. Very interesting devil's walking stick. It looks kind of like a palm tree in that the leaves are concentrated at the top of the plant. So that one, and it is definitely armed. It's the one I got in trouble at Fort Polk trying to plant it when they were worried about kids running into it. Or getting stuck by it. So very spiky, very armed, very beautiful plant with white flowers and then beautiful purple fruits. I have heard discussions of not edible, but it may be medicinal because it's in the same family as ginseng. The one disadvantage, now I should warn you, this thing does spread. I've moved it into my property, and then I go back and I have 3 or 4 times what I used to have. So be aware that this one, will spread, but it's very easy to mow down when it's young or cut down when it's young. But it does have that spreading problem to other areas. Strawberry bush, Euonymus americana, beautiful thing. You can see why it's called strawberry. That's the fruits down there. This thing is supposed to be candy for deer. They're supposed to just eat it down. So if you have it, you may be feeding lots of deer, but it's got green stems and that are square and the leaves are opposite. So you kind of start thinking mint, but it's woody. I think there's only one woody mint, maybe more, but anyway, it's a very interesting plant if you can get one and get it growing, and you're not going to have to deal with a lot of height, a lot of space. This thing can just kind of stays mildly where you put it, and it doesn't get really big. So everybody should have at least one strawberry bush. Wing sumac. See, you can see the wings on there's a compound leaf there. You can see those wings in the back. Not this, not the wood, but it's on the leaves. Wonderful fruits that are reddish. And every August, September, October, I make lemonade. You can take those fruits off, soak them in water, have a wonderful lemonade. If you go to a Mediterranean restaurant, they serve sumac, which are these fruits ground up. Most of them come from the Middle Eastern sumac, but I've heard some people actually using this plant and some of its relatives that are very similar and grinding those up and making the sumac spice that's used in Mediterranean food. So smaller tree, maybe a large shrub, but the wing sumac, that's a great one to add to your property. If you don't, most people have it already though. This is one I've been disappointed in, but mainly because like the devil's walking stick, this thing spreads everywhere. This has filled up my yard in places. So I have to take a lot of these out. This is a shining sumac, a little different. It's usually found a little bit to the north, gets a little bit taller. The fruits on this one, I go back, the fruits on this one, the whole group droops, and the fruits on the shining sumac, the fruit cluster stands up, but they're both red. They both can be used to make lemonade. So there are no problems with them. Just be aware that if it's got red fruits, it's not poison sumac. No, poison sumac has a very limited distribution in Louisiana. Basically, where you find pitcher plants, you may find the poison sumac, and it has green fruit. So don't worry about this. But now, as a kid, I was told this sumac right here was poisonous, and we stayed away from it. So, but now I've been drinking quite a bit, and this one too. Virginia willow, also called Virginia sweetspire, a real popular ornamental because of its size. It's going to stay, 3-4 feet tall. It has beautiful fall color on the leaves, and there are a couple of selections out there of these with different leaf shapes and so forth. If you hold that leaf up and if you look at that bottom center one, look at the margin, the teeth, it has a very fine teeth. So they usually call the teeth, the margins that have pointed teeth serrate, but this one is so small, it's called cerulate. So because it has small pointed teeth, cerulate. So Virginia willow, Virginia sweetspire are a good plant if you can find it, and often it is available. And I forget the one variety out there. There is a maybe more than one cultivar of those. Wax myrtle, easy. I think wax myrtle may have been one of the first native plant shrubs. I used to see this in banks because it's evergreen, and people didn't realize back in the day when native plant was a bad term, they were already planting wax myrtles in a lot of the banks, and they're still there. The leaves are evergreen. The leaves make a great tea. I've been serving it quite a bit in this year and other years, but particularly this year when some of the other plants didn't have leaves yet to make tea out of. This one does. And also a spice, crush up the leaves. And those berries over on the right, the birds love them, but they have a wax on them, and you can make a bayberry candle by boiling that wax out. But that's a lot of work, and we got to have investment time in computers like you are tonight, watching a Zoom or watching TV. Just don't have time to do much of that. So what you can do, if you have these, harvest them, dry them, buy a regular candle, melt the wax in the regular candle, add these to it, and then let it harden. And then when you burn it, you'll get the bayberry smell, and you did it yourself and you didn't pay it. But mainly you would, be recycling or cycling or using the fruits off of some of the trees you're growing. So you should have at least one of these in your yard, or maybe more than that, but it's a wonderful evergreen, and that's an important characteristic in many cases with leaves that are useful, and fruits that are useful too. So wax myrtle, also called bayberry. Witch hazel, very interesting. The only native plant I know of that flowers in this area in November with the yellow flowers. Now there's a new species, so to speak, kind of very rare with red flowers. But look at the fruits down at the bottom, the leaves over on the left. Witch hazel, of course, is used to make the extract for treating acne and other things. But it makes a great tea too. I've been serving this when we dry those leaves and add hot water, and it's some people's favorite. One of the most interesting things in the bottom right, when those fruits are mature, they slowly squeeze the seeds out, and they're supposed to go 20 feet. So the story goes, one time I brought some fruits into the kitchen and left them in a paper bag, and they started exploding. And Susan wondered what in the world was going on. So I told people about it, and some people started actually bringing them in. I had another excuse to drink beer and wait for the witch hazel to open up and pop in the bag. Some people put it in tin cans so it would make more noise. So something to be aware of. If you can find unopened witch hazel fruits and bring them in, let them dry us in something, you'll get an interesting explosion because in nature they would squeeze them out, and they'd go a pretty good ways in nature. The viburnums, a lot of those, the one on the left is arrowwood, very common, probably the most common, somewhat larger shrub out there. One that would be great, and I know some people were trying to propagate it one time, is the maple leaf viburnum. And there are other viburnums too. There's rusty black haw viburnum, and there's several native viburnums. And then there's some other viburnums that are native, but not native to Louisiana, but they've been brought in from states to the east. So viburnum, very important, but most of these are large shrubs, but the maple leaf one is a small shrub, doesn't get much taller than 3 to 4 feet. So if you can find it, try to grow it. I don't know if people have been, I had one, not on my property, but right off my property on the National Forest, but I haven't been able to find it since Hurricane Laura put a bunch of trees on top of it. Woody vines, important in some places to add. So here are a few of those. Cross vines in flower right now. You hear about it. I was doing a talk at the Bow, Becoming an Outdoor Woman, a week or so ago. We saw this in flower. Those flowers have a very interesting odor. To me, it's the old candy called bitto honey. But some of the people that have never smelled bitto honey says it smells like beef bouillon cubes. So it's got an interesting smell, but an interesting color. There are some cultivars that are more evergreen, more reliable flowering. In the wild, you don't see many of these in flower. But crossvine's one you could add and be different from your neighbor. Yellow jasmine, there's so much of that. I wouldn't even think about planting it maybe, but it is. If you don't have it, I mean, tons of it here in the pine forest region. It's evergreen. One disadvantage, this is reported to be poisonous. In fact, we hear that we don't see bees in the flowers, but the leaves are supposed to be poisonous. So that's one very, very early flowering, very wonderful smelling, especially when you walk around. And sometimes at night when I'm walking around, I find the path just laden with yellow jasmine flowers, and that odor is wonderful. So it's one to think about, but keep in mind that it is the problem perhaps with it being poisonous. And also the flowers are gone pretty quickly. Coral honeysuckle, a wonderful plant, and seems like it flowers 12 months of the year, and has those leaves that look like the non-native Japanese honeysuckle. The way I identified it is white on the undersurface, and some of the leaves are fused together, so called so it has the opposite leaves, and the leaves are sessile, so it's a connate perfoliate leaves, and they're fused together. If it has that, it's a coral honeysuckle. Now, if it has the teeth, the leaves that have like edges that look like they're lobed or with teeth, it's going to be the Japanese honeysuckle, which never has that. So but otherwise, you just got to look at the bottom of the leaf. If it's white on that undersurface, and then it's the coral honeysuckle, and if it's green on the undersurface, then it's going to be the Japanese honeysuckle. And there's a lot of Japanese honeysuckle out there, and a good bit of this. And if you get it planted and going, like I say, I've had, seems to be in flower every month of the year. Trumpet creeper, the big orange flowers, and a very aggressive plant in some, and some people plant it for the hummingbird. And so this flowers maybe May and June, not early, but later when some of the other red flowers for the hummingbirds are going downhill, would be a good addition to add to your property. It does get kind of tall and rampant. Then a few of the forbs, this could take a whole couple of sessions to talk about. So I just put a few plants in here to talk about the herbaceous plants, and then a little bit on the ferns. But here's the asters, quite a few asters out there. Of course, they're the caterpillar food for the pearl crescent that you see there. So lots of colors. And to me, it's one of the most difficult genera to identify to species. There are a couple that I can get right away. Patens, that has the leaves that wrap around the stem, but there's so many asters that, I can say that's an aster, but I don't know which one. So anyway, that's out there. Mountain mints, one of my favorites. There are 3 species in the state. The narrowleaf on the left, the cluster mountain mint or bottomland mountain mint, the muticum, and then what some people call grandma's mint, because it's the one that got me started in botany at the bottom. And my grandmother would harvest it and dry it and put it in sausage and flavor. But later it turned out that not only did it flavor the sausage, but it kept bacteria from growing. So as I get older, my ancestors get smarter, and that plant is it's very aggressive, spreads areas. And some of that came to Tom Sawyer days, we transplanted a lot of that into my property. I've given away a lot and make a tea out of the muticum, the bottomland one. But we have all 3 on our property. 2 were here when we moved here, and we added the 3rd one. So it's a great mint, great plant to have, not only because of the leaves, but also the flowers, because we get lots of bees, lots of even butterflies, purple hair streak, things like that on the flowers in the summer. The bee balm, the horse mint, spotted bee balm, Monarda punctata, with the dots on the bracts of the flowers. There's always a story I have to tell, so I'm sorry some of you may have heard this before, but I went to a North American Prairie Conference several years ago, and on the list of one of the plants we were going to see was spotted bee balm. I'd not heard of it, so I'm thinking I'm going to see a new plant. I was so disappointed when I got on the tour. It was the same horse mint that we had here in Louisiana, so it was just another common name for the same plant, Monarda punctata. This one to me, is more attractive and so forth. This is the balm with a whole bunch of terms, bergamot with the lavender flowers, or some pure white. There is a darker purple one called Peter's Purple. I've lost that one. I don't have anymore. Sometimes we say that's the name for Peter Luce. I don't know if that's the truth or not, but we can say that. But anyway, there is a darker purple one called Peter's Purple. It's a lavender. It's a beautiful one. Also has a nice odor to it. But I just don't like the tea that it makes compared to the tea that I get from the mountain mint. But some people do make tea out of it. Indian blankets. There are at least, let me see if I have them here. Yeah, there are 2 species. This is a perennial. This is the one not as well known, because it doesn't get as big. If you see the next one, this is the annual, lots of seed varieties and so forth planted on the roadside. This is a perennial, and perennial comes in 2. I think there's a 3rd one over in East Texas, but there is the one on the left, the regular astravalus, and the one on the right with the yellow center. So that one, and then there's some with the pinkish flowers in East Texas. I forget the variety, but that's considered a rare one over there in East Texas. We only have these 2. And then when you get to the annuals, this is if you went down to the store or went somewhere to buy seeds, you'd probably be getting this one, this Indian blanket with a fire wheel, lots of selections, and it's an annual. Flowers are bigger, you know, and you plant it and the roadsides are covered with it for a year or two, then it disappears because it's an annual. Or if you, like I do, have this, the one on the left already growing on my property, it's a perennial, not as spectacular as the annual. So, and then the cardinal flower. That's a lot of people look for that normally in wet areas. And we start thinking September, October, you'll see this in flower in wet areas. So a lot of people have planted it. So, you know, I don't know how well it does in dry areas, but it's normally found in wet areas. Being red-green colorblind, I don't get as excited about this one as many of you do. There's another one. This is a Louisiana fire pink. I know it's found in sandy soils here in western Louisiana, but I've known some people who took it to Baton Rouge, where it's definitely not sandy, and it did all right. So this is one that if you can find the seeds of it, whatever, you should be try this one, because it's one of the few plants out there that's named for Louisiana. It's got other common names too, but I stick with the Louisiana fire pink, but a beautiful red one in sandy soil. And of course, the compass plant, the Silphium laciniatum, and Aldo Leopold writes a lot about it. The leaves are compound, and then they are they turn so that the narrow edge points north and south, and the wide edge points east and west. Wonderful for getting sun in the morning and sun in the afternoon, because you've got this great big wide thing trying to catch the sun. So very interesting. Also makes pretty yellow flowers like typical sunflowers. And I've read that people that got lost in the dark in the Midwest fill this plant to figure out which way was north or south. That, you know, they couldn't determine if it was north or not, but they could determine which way was north and south, rather than which way was east and west on the compass plant. The pale coneflowers are all across the state in the pine forest. They even have some on Allen Acres, and naturally occurring ones. The purple coneflowers, on the other hand, from what I've been reading, you know, is told and looked and see, there were only 3 locations in Louisiana naturally occurring in the prairie types at Fort Polk, at the Tullis, and then up at Copenhagen. So all the rest have been planted. The people in horticulture have developed lots of colors of these, so that's an interesting plant. And because you can, if you can get the original color, original ones from that, you've got natives, but you know the others are there are many color varieties of purpurea out there. But an interesting and very important nectar plant. Button snake root, what's it called? Rattlesnake master. That's to me, when we were working in the prairie, we would this was kind of an indication of a remnant or a prairie. That picture on the right is from Mark Pasterek with a wasp on that. So it's an important pollinator plant. Lots of insects go to the plant, and one that you should have in your yard is a Eryngium yuccifolium, the button, whatever you call it, whether you call it button snake root, Eryngium yuccifolium, or the rattlesnake master. One quick little thing on this, there was a lady at LSU that researched that Native Americans use these tough, leathery leaves to make moccasins out of when they didn't have the animal material. So that she did a good bit of research on that at LSU on the leaves of the Eryngium yuccifolium. Prairie coneflower, just thinking about, I need to get some of that on my property. You get in the Midwest, it's everywhere. We got a little bit growing wild in Louisiana, a little bit on the north of Leesville, and quite a bit up in the northern parts of the state, Wind Parish, some of those. But when you get in the Midwest, this Radipida is everywhere. Now, what we get people planting a lot of is the other species in that, which is called Mexican hat. But again, it's a Retipida, and I think those are native, even though like some things that have the Mexican name in it, they are native to the United States. So roadsides on this one, and you'll see it planted. So sometimes in seed mixes, you would see the Retipida, the Mexican sunflower. Coreopsis is a big genus, lots to kind of recognize. It also looks a lot like a a fall blooming plant called videns. They're both called tick seed. So the sunflower family is a very, very important herbaceous plant, and lots of species for flowers and lots of planting, some annual, some perennial. So think of that, but lots of coreopsis out there, and some even have dark red centers and so forth. Rudbeckia is another one, the black-eyed Susan. Several species of those in around the state. Some big flowered, small flowers. I guess the Rudbeckia hirta is probably the most common. I think that's what that bottom right one is. I forget where I took that picture, but and I think the one on the left is subtomentosa. It's got stripes on the stem. Very interesting. I was out with a bug guide gathering here. We had a guy from Chicago, and I couldn't remember the scientific name, and he knew it. And I'm thinking, wow, this thing grows in Chicago. So Rudbeckia subtomentosa, all the way from here to Illinois. But it's normally found kind of near the acid, but Malcolm Vedrine has it growing at his house, so it's adaptable to non-acid areas. So black-eyed Susans, very, very many species and selections out there. And everybody's favorite with the red, the Indian pink, should be flowering soon, if not already. Shade tolerant, that's an important one of the really shade tolerance on Indian pink. Joe Pye weed, very magnet for nectar for butterflies, and there's at least two species or more, but fistulosum is usually in the acid, but adaptable to non-acid, and maculatum is one that often comes in from the north into and planted. But you get one of these, you get pretty tall, you're going to have lots of nectaring butterflies and other insects on a Joe Pye weed. So that's one that's important. The rose mallows, swamp rose mallows, a couple of species common, always arguments about it. The color doesn't seem to matter that much. You can see a lot of variation in the color, so please don't try to identify them by color. Look at the leaves and look at other things, but not so much the color of the petals, because you get a lot of variation in color of petals. So a good plant to have the size and the pretty flowers for it. And I don't remember, but I'm pretty sure there are some insects that lay, the caterpillars would eat these. Most of our morning glories, the blues and so forth, are not native. They're from India and other places. This is a native. Big white flowers, like sandy soil, but I've seen it in others. It also makes this great big tuber that's edible. So it's called manroot. So again, working and looking at the references from Caddo, they use it quite a bit. So big white flowers, and we were lucky when we moved here. There was a good population right by the barn and very sandy soil, and you see it throughout this western part of the state, and I see records of it from other parts of the state. So it may not be restricted to the sandy soil like I once thought. So if you're focusing on truly native and truly perennial morning glories, try to get this one. It's going to be that pure white. Now, if you like just the color and so forth, those are the non-natives, and those are annuals that you plant. That most of the blue ones are, and the red ones, and well, some of the red ones are also native. Milkweeds, that's a whole nother topic out there, but a number of those. A bottom right one is rubra in the Bay Gulls. Bottom left one is the upland one, the one that doesn't have milky juice. The top right one is perennis, the swamp one, and the top left one is amplexicaulis. That's one I have on my property already, and it's already up and getting ready to flower. That was here. I didn't plant it. And then, of course, other milkweeds I could put here. Some of you know that, a couple of years ago or a year ago, I did a whole little thing on the milkweeds, and that's out there. We could make it available in maybe one of the morning emails. Blazing stars, lots of those, and they really, when they flower, people notice. Now, if you notice up on the top left, the white flowers among the blazing stars, that's that one I talked about a few minutes ago, the button snake root or the rattlesnake master, the Erengium there with it. So blazing stars, most of them start in August, some in July, a little bit of variation in shape and size, but the color there, every now and then you might get a white flowered one, but very popular are the blazing stars. And then of course, the ashy sunflower, a perennial, really great plant to have because it's perennial. And I think that the vegetation is attractive, even if it's not in flower. It kind of has a bluish color to it. And I always thought that roadside people should be planting this because it doesn't get that tall and it has the vegetation that's attractive. And then when it does flower, it makes it. So ashy sunflower, a prairie plant that you plant, and Malcolm Vedrine says it'll go from seed to flowers in the first year, where most perennials take 2 years at least, maybe sometimes more, but that one. Then just a few of the grasses and sedges and rushes, and then the ferns. Okay, I hope everybody's still awake. And sugarcane plume grass is a tall one that would fill in. Now you have to be careful. It does get pretty tall, and it also seems to have seeds that spread. So when I first learned it, it was the genus Erianthus. Then it got transferred to the same genus as sugarcane, Sicarium gigantea. So that's a pretty one. Some color variation from pink to white, and in the flowers and at the top, the inflorescences. Inland sea oats, Chasmanthium latifolium. I always thought this should be our state grass if we ever did one. Very easy to grow. The stems kind of look like monkey grass replacements, and then when it flowers, it has this, and it usually makes seeds and spreads, so you don't usually have trouble. Normally found along streams, but it's adaptable to many. I have a lot of it in my yard, adaptable to many places. Switchgrass, a very interesting one that's rhizomatous, gets pretty tall. Very, very, very interesting grass out there. So some color in it, but taller, maybe 5 to 6 feet tall. So switchgrass, big blue stem. That one, the switchgrass has an advantage that it usually stands up, and even in the winter, whereas big blue stem falls over. And the Caddo made houses out of switchgrass because of that fact. It was strong, but they didn't seem to use big blue stem. Even both plants were side by side. So very interesting on big blue stem versus switchgrass. And then little blue stem, which is very common, very easy to get and grow. In fact, the front of the Welcome Center at Opelousas, the horticulturists there came over here near me, and we dug up a whole bunch of little blue stem and they planted it in front. So it can fill in space. It's a nice clump former. So it's interesting that years ago we did a little bit of research on overland prevention of silting, and we tried. This was the best plant because look at all those stems that would catch the dirt that would flow over. Whereas if you go back to big blue stem, the stems are scattered, and even switchgrass a little bit better. But the best one was this one for catching dirt for overland sedimentation, catching it. Indian grass, pretty in the fall with the yellow, also rhizomatous, and one that maybe would catch the eye of everyone for an ornamental, the toothache grass. This is funny. People chew the stem and get the same toothache that you get from the toothache tree, but I don't. I don't know if it's genetic or what. I just don't know. Other people say, oh, I can taste it, but I don't. But I really like the shape of the spikes that they have on the top, and they're curled up on the left there, so that you sometimes get later in the year. So interesting one that if you can get it growing in your yard, you would be ahead of your neighbors probably. They would not have this one. And muley grass, which is one of those that also got popular at Banks, but a different species. I think that species came from Texas, but it's still native. But we do have 2 or 3 species of muley grass. And they're sort of like the love grasses. It's something you could plant and it's not rhizomatous, but it's a clump form. So you're not going to get a lot, but you'd have that nice clump on it. And just a couple of sedges. They're all, to me, they're real attractive with the shapes and so forth. But these are usually pretty wet, but they'll do all right and dry. But then one of the more spectacular that many people think these are flowers, but those are just bracts. So the white top sedge, which is out in the bogs and savannas, but you can grow it in yours. And then the last group, I think, I don't remember, are the ferns, just a couple of ferns. This is, you almost want to say in flower, but be careful. And I almost did it. This has got spores on it right now. There was a young lady here last week with a plant ID class. We found this with spores. It's beautiful with a cinnamon shape. So this is cinnamon fern that's out there, and it's same genus as the royal fern, which has green. So both of these are some larger ferns that are pretty reliable. The royal fern is not as picky for pH as the cinnamon fern. The cinnamon fern, I've only seen it in the acid bogs and bagels, but I've seen this all the way to New Orleans where you don't have the acid. So royal fern, these are two of the bigger ferns that I would look at. And one of the things that I've observed, and I know everybody gets excited about irises, but I really have trouble here. And we've had trouble at Fort Pope growing them. I think that irises don't like the acid pH. Now, they're, if you look and think about where most of the irises are, they're in the marsh where it's not acid, and they're in the flood, the Mississippi and Red River floodplains where it's not acid. But it really has, I really have trouble growing irises in this area, and other people have too. And so there was an interesting thing years ago that the more acid, if you want to change the pH, you add calcium to make it more alkaline, to make it more acid, you add sulfur. My mother told me something, that we had hydrangea flowers, and if we wanted to change them from blue to pink, we need to put old bricks around them. And at that point, I thought she was crazy. And then when I got into college and heard about this, and the fact that she said old bricks, which has mortar, and mortar has calcium. And so the rain would change the pH. So my mother was right. And I can tell you now, today, you were right. And the mortar came from the old bricks. She didn't say new bricks, so they're old bricks. So, and the other thing is you can move plants up, but not down. Usually wetland species tolerate wet conditions, but they can be grown under dry conditions. Ball cypress is a good example. Button bush is another. They're normally found in wet, but you can grow them in very dry conditions. And remember, annuals versus perennials. Annuals in 1 year, and back to seed. Perennials live for 2 or more years and go back from underground parts. And so most people say that the perennial, the seeds are doomed. You need to move them somewhere else because they can't come up there. They're already there. So succession is important to think about. And if you plant plants out there, they're going to start competing with each other, and they're going to change over the years. So competition for water. So the annuals are the first plants to be lost because they cannot germinate except after disturbance. I remember lots of people would tell me that they used to see wildflowers along the side of the road. They didn't know what the highway department did. And I said, you got to realize that there's succession going on. There are new plants coming in, old ones getting lost, and the annuals would disappear if you don't re-disturb the area. So one of those things. And purple false foxglove and partridge pea are a couple of annuals that are very interesting. They can germinate and grow right with perennials. So you can go along the road and go out in the forest and you'll find these two plants, but they're annuals, and you wouldn't think that. You would think they are perennials. So a couple of things to keep in mind for that. And there are early succession and disappear with time. So broom sedge will be replaced by little blue stem. Swamp sunflower will go away. I mean, if you don't disturb that thing that gets so tall and dominates the side of the roads. Pines are supposed to go away eventually with oaks, and then American beech is supposed to eventually take over the area. So these are some things to think about that are going on with succession. And I've heard that before, mowed at the wrong time, so wildflowers. So, And so I know it's been long, so hopefully you got some information and hopefully you have that plant list and follow along. So I'll try to take questions if I can. I may have to. Okay. Any questions out there? Yeah, you have to, I think you have to unmute yourself if you need to ask, I think, a question. May have to, let's see, there's some things in the chat. Let's see what's there. Oh, Ali, okay. All right. Any, let's see, we see any questions?
Let's go down right here.
Okay, we are planning, oh, you've already answered it. We
Yeah,
are
go
planning to,
There was some other questions.
that was just her, yeah.
Oh, I thought there was one more. Right here.
Somebody
When
asked,
does,
Kate, yeah, she asked when New Jersey tea blooms, and then there's one about dwarf palmetto.
okay, dwarf, I mean, New Jersey tea, I think if I remember right, blooms in May and June, and it's a small one, but it's very small. You really have to find it. I've only seen it in the pine forest. Yeah, not in the others. Maybe in the prairies. Yeah, yeah. There's been a problem with dwarf palmetto and cabbage palm in recent years. There was some DNA genetic studies and so forth, and they may have changed it, but at one time they said we only have one species in Louisiana. It destroyed a lot of people that said we had the cabbage one, even though it's bigger, that the dwarf one grows up. I don't know. I mean, that if you go back, I don't know how many years ago, somebody did some research on it and said that we only had one, and it was all the dwarf palmetto. If you go to the U.S. distribution, you'll see that the cabbage one, if I remember right, was only along the East Coast, and there was none in Louisiana. So I don't know what to tell you about those big tall ones that are totally different. What happened, and from those that really had a stem like that, I know for years we had information way back from Claire Brown that there were two. There was cabbage and the dwarf, and so I don't know what's going on with that, but that's out there on, and maybe some new information, but I haven't seen it. I've got some planted palmetto on my property, but not the other one. Let's see. Oh, how well does the wax myrtle handle moist, somewhat clay soils? I see it. I see wax myrtle. I've seen it all the way through the marsh, but usually not in the water in the marsh, but up on the higher areas in the marsh. So, not really wet. So I don't think it can really have its feet wet. Now, you should realize, and I don't bring it up too much here, there is a second species of wax myrtle called the Bengal wax myrtle, which has wider leaves and so forth. And I know that Rick Webb was looking for it once to try to grow it to sell. You find it in the edges of Begals, and it does tolerate the wetter conditions, that it has bigger leaves. It had very different fruits. They weren't the wax type on that, on like you see on the regular wax myrtle, but there is a Bengal wax myrtle out there. You can probably Google some pictures, and I really probably need to do a morning email with that Bengal wax myrtle. I see it. I have some even back of my house on the Forest Service property, and I have a good bit in the bogs nearby. So I need to look at that one. But regular old wax myrtle seems to be able to, I would say, moist but not wet conditions, because you do see it all the way to Grand Isle and on Grand Isle, so through the marsh. But I think most of those places where you see it, it's not really having its feet in the water. Let's see. Someone asked me about planting native plants in New Orleans. Susan Norris Davis has a book, right? I know she has a book. I think it's got on how to plant in New Orleans. Sorry, I don't remember the title. I've got so many books, but there is a book about planting in New Orleans from Susan Norris Davis down there. And we are going to try to get this posted, just like some of the other presentations that we've had before. Also, when they go to Wild Ones, only Wild Ones members, but we're taking it from there and putting it on our website. So we have a nephew in California that's working on them and putting them up. So hopefully we'll have them on our own website, so you don't have to go through, well, not that it's bad, but you wouldn't have to go through Wild Ones, but you can go directly to our website. So I think we have Betty Kaufman's up from last month already. I'll have to double check on that on our website, and some of the other that we did before. So any other, I hope I didn't miss any of the questions. So if I did, just ask me again. I can try, or send it tomorrow. Send it on the email so I can also answer on the emails tomorrow morning. I have Sunnyvale's ready to go out tomorrow on the morning email. Those of you that are not familiar with that, you can go to our website and you can sign up and get a plan of the day with a month of the day, a pun, and then also upcoming events every now and then, whenever events are out there. So thank you all very much. And it's time for me to go get some coffee. Thank you.